I'd like to call this meeting to order. We'll have the moment of silence and pledge led by Mr. Watson.
Take a moment of silence. Say pledge allegiance. Pledge allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to the Board of Education's November work session. We appreciate you being here and being engaged. And also, our newly elected District 6 board member, Betsy Henderson, is here. And we wanted to say congratulations, Betsy. And we all look forward to serving with you. Glad you're here tonight. Thank you. A policy review meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, November 18th at 1:30, and a meeting packet will be made available as soon as possible. The Special Question Committee will meet on Tuesday, November 17th at 4 p.m. to certify the poll results from our professional employees regarding the continuance of our collaborative conferencing process. Also, the Joint Education Committee will meet on Monday, December 7th at 5:30 in this boardroom. A meeting agenda will be published as we get closer to the meeting date. And we, after our work session, two-day work session that we had in September, we were talking about the vision and mission a lot. And so we probably won't do it every single meeting, but we thought we would really try to spotlight our vision and mission statement at several of our meetings. So I would like to refer to Ms. Babb, and she's going to talk about our vision and mission statement.
Sure. Our Knox County Board of Education's mission is to provide excellent and accessible learning opportunities that empower all students to realize their full potential. I want to focus on the part of our mission that talks about empowering all students to realize their full potential. One way I feel like Knox County Schools exemplifies this is through some of our alternative schools. When we say we mean all, we mean from any socioeconomic level, any type of family, those with mental, physical, and social special needs. We're here to take care of all students in Knox County. In Knox County Schools, we offer several non-traditional schools that help those students who are having behavioral issues, have special physical and mental needs, and those who need a more focused alternative route to graduating. I've been able to visit Ridgedale Alternative School, Richard Yoakley Transition School, and KEC, which is in my district, since being on the board. I've been so impressed with the dedication of the administration, staff, and teachers of these schools who go above and beyond to meet the unique needs of these students. We also offer the Kelly Volunteer Academy for high school students who are seeking an alternative from the regular classroom setting but wish to graduate with a high school diploma, and Fort Sanders Development Center, which caters to our youngest students who have social, emotional, and physical special needs. I just wanted to focus on that because I really do think it's important for us to just point out how we are able to really, reach all of our students. And while we're a big district, I do think that's one of the things that enables us to do is actually offer some things that some of these smaller districts are not able to do. So that's my focus today.
Okay, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Do we have any changes to the agenda? Okay, do we have a motion to approve?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Ms. Satterfield, a second by Mr. Watson. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, and now I would like to refer to Mr. Thomas for the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. A few updates for you this evening. Some of this is going to sound real repetitive, but I have found that repetitive is good. So I'll repeat some of it again, and you maybe you've heard that a lot, so you can maybe tune out some of it. But again, just want to begin by reminding families of an important deadline that's coming up very quickly regarding the semester that begins on January 5th. Families who want to change their learning model in the spring semester from virtual to in-person instruction or from in-person to virtual instruction must fill out an enrollment form by 3:30 p.m. on Friday, November the 6th. 3:30 p.m. Friday, November the 6th. That is this Friday. So we've reminded you several times, but one more time. Probably remind you a couple of times before Friday too, so, but I'll do that less publicly. Just to be clear, again, that deadline is 48 hours away, or less than 48 hours away, so families who want to change their students' learning model must do so quickly. The enrollment form is available on our website, www.knoxschools.org/connect. Families who are unable to fill out the online form can get a paper copy at their school or a printable form on our website, and printable forms are available in 6 languages. Families that have multiple children in Knox County schools should complete the form for each student who will change their learning model. Again, multiple children, complete a form for each student. Also, please keep in mind that families who are happy with their learning model do not need to take any action. So if you're happy, you do not need to do anything. As a reminder, report cards from the first 9-week grading period are now available. Because we've heard from principals that students in the virtual program are not doing as well as those learning in person, we did a quick look at grades assigned. Remember, I think I told you at the 4.5-week mark, this is what it looks like, and I would look at it again. And our research department did not do this. This is just me looking at 9-week grades, taking, I think, 14 of our schools. I believe I looked at 6 elementary schools, 4 middle schools, 4 high schools, again in northeast, southwest, urban, suburban, rural, so just a cross-section of schools. So a sampling of district-wide data reflects that out of all grades assigned in the in-person platform, 9.4% were Fs, and out of all grades assigned in the virtual learning program, 21.5% were Fs. So the proportion of Fs assigned between in-person and virtual actually widened when compared to the grades assigned at the 4.5-week benchmark. So just for keeping that in mind. And as I've said before, our virtual teachers are doing an outstanding job. Very pleased that we're able to offer the virtual option for families who have health risks related to COVID-19 or other concerns. But at the same time, please keep in mind that students who have the greatest success in the virtual program are those who benefit from a strong structure at home, and also they are highly disciplined and self-motivated. As of this afternoon, more than 4,400 requests to change have been submitted. Among those, approximately 3,700 have requested a change from virtual to in-person, and approximately 700 have requested a change from in-person to virtual. So, and in closing, I also want to say congratulations to Mrs. Betsy Henderson, who was elected yesterday as the new 6th District Representative on the Board of Education. I know you will do a great job, and our team is looking forward to working with you to support students, employees, and families. So congratulations. Madam Chair, members of the board, that concludes my report for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Thomas. Board members?
I have a question.
Yes.
Superintendent Thomas.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to remember one of these days.
It's all
Go
good.
ahead.
It's all good. I know you can't speak to this from a data standpoint, but just anecdotally, do you have a sense of how many kids who are in person, how much the quarantine is impacting them around their grades? I've just heard different stories about kids who get really off track during that quarantine period, and what kind of strategies we're using to bring them back in.
I do not have any information along that line, although John, maybe our research department can sort of take a look at that in terms of looking at grades. And what I have done is very unscientific, and I think Dr. Reiswick and his team would probably say, hey, that may be pretty flawed what you did, but again, just looking at the grades that have been assigned is where this information comes from. And I know REA is going to be looking at this much closer and much more scientifically than what I have done, but I don't really know, but we'll be glad to take a look.
Thank you.
To look at that.
Have any other questions? Okay. All right. Here are several changes that we have to several of the items that I want to go through before we begin reviewing the agenda. With the approval of the Law Department, item 9C1 is for your ratification dealing with an MOU with the Tennessee Department of Education that Superintendent Thomas and myself approved by executive committee action due to the required state deadline, which occurred last Friday, October 30th. Mr. Dupler, please correct me if I misstate anything, but to summarize this MOU, it is an extension of our current primary partnership agreements with Lincoln Memorial University and the University of Tennessee at Knoxville for our educator preparation program. This MOU will allow LMU and UTK to receive grant funding from the Tennessee Department of Education designated to offering opportunities to our educational assistants to attain certification in the areas of special education or ESL, and it is at no cost to Knox County schools. And when we get to this item, both Mr. Dupler and Mr. Bolton can answer questions. Is that sufficient for the moment? Okay, so we'll get to that item, but that just explains why that is for your ratification. We have a change on item 9D4. You should have received an email on this earlier today. This is the agreement with Hunter Valley Farm for Powell High School's 2021 prom. The agreement has been updated to reflect the vendor's new refund policy if the event had to be canceled, and also clarifies that the agreement is between Powell High School and Hunter Valley Farm and not the school sponsor. And we can ask questions when we get to that agenda item. Under board policies, item 10A, which is the second reading of policy I-341, the uniform grading policy. Our curriculum and instruction team noticed a correction was needed on lines 21 and 23 on page 1. When the policy was issued in 2018, it stated that quality points of 1 and 0.5 would be added for an F grade for dual credit enrollment or honors courses, but that is not correct and should have reflected 0 points for an F grade. Dr. Reiswick will be happy to answer questions when we get to this policy, but the error did not affect any of our students, and the amended policy attached has those changes incorporated. So we needed to make this clarification because it's currently on our agenda for second reading. 2 more, we're almost there. On item 10F, referring to policy J151, on line 32 of page 1, there is a singular pronoun referring to he, and it has been recommended that it be updated to he or she, as is used consistently throughout the policy. So that amendment is also redlined for our consideration. And once again, this policy is on second reading. So that's the reason for the additional information right now. For items 10I and J, the board approved amendments on first reading offered by Mr. Watson to provide accountability by requiring lists of the applicable coordinators to be maintained by the Director of School Culture. When the amended motion was approved for policy J580, Ms. Owen made a friendly request to include that the list shall be updated to at least annually. So to be consistent, the words at least annually have been included in the second reading of policy J400 as well. Okay, so those are the updates that we have, and if you have any questions on those, just hold them and we'll discuss them when we get to those items. And let's see. Okay, I think that we've already approved the agenda, so we will go ahead and begin discussion on our agenda. Okay, do we have any questions on C1 or 2? Go ahead, Ms. Babb, I'm sorry.
Yes, on this program, I know we've talked about it, but I really don't understand it completely. How this differs from kind of what UT's already doing or what LMU's already doing. And also, I noticed that I think it starts in January and goes through like the summer of 2022. So it seems like it's a 1.5-year program. So I was just wanting to make sure, are people able to get their certificates or whatever they need in that time? So just a little bit more explanation would be great.
Mr. Bolton.
Absolutely. Madam Chair, rest of the board. This agreement is actually, this memorandum of understanding is intended, it was a federal grant that was applied for by the university. We wrote, Bob signed a letter of support. And what this does is it basically pays for the hours for a person already having a bachelor's degree to go through the process of getting their initial licensure. Call it job embedded program or anything like that, where they have to take those required education courses so that they can become a teacher of record. And so when we looked at this program, currently in our Grow Your Own program with UTK, we lay it out as 3 phases. The first phase is already underway with our aspiring teachers and the internship and shortening that time to become to get a livable wage for those folks. Second part is identifying talent inside of with teachers assistants that we currently have. And the first round of that would be those that already have a bachelor's degree, which would be job embedded placed people. So what this does is this gives us 2 programs for them to choose from in which they could go to those programs at no cost to achieve their certification.
So for like a TA that's choosing to do this, how long would it actually take them to get their, I guess, teaching certification?
It really depends. It has to do with the programming that's provided by the Educator Prep program. There's really not a lot that we can do in terms of that program, short of the approval that they go through the state process. Some it can be as few as 9 hours. Some it can be more. They go through a transcript analysis to see the classes that they have had, to look and see if there's any prerequisite courses that would suffice some of those requirements. And then once they go through that process, then they'll take once the transcript analysis is completed, then they'll look to see what other classes they need to fulfill those requirements.
Okay, so it's very specified for the person, looking
Correct.
at what they need. Okay, because that the little bit of concern I had was, I mean, I'm totally support this. It's not that I don't support it, but when I looked at the time frame of the contract with it being 1.5 years, I was just concerned that people even could get their certification in that 1.5 years before the grant ran out.
Typically, you're looking for a job embedded program. Typically, the time span is about 1.5 years for them to get those prerequisite classes. Seems like it depends on the EPP, whether it's going to be a cohort model or how they will go through that process. But most of our job embedded folks will complete their program requirements in 1.5 years.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Watson.
Mr. Bolton,
Mr. Bolton, don't leave.
Okay. Is the hope that this would expand to other universities and higher educational institutions?
Well, the grant window has now closed for that.
Okay.
So that would be great if that were the case.
And we don't know if it'll be renewed?
It could be.
Sure.
That's a possibility.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Thank you. Okay. All right, seeing no more questions on this one, we will move to the first item and contract. Do we have any questions on 1, 2, or 3, or 4? Okay, moving to board policies. Any questions on A or B? C or D? E or F? G or H? I or J? Okay, and then any questions on any of the 3 grants? Okay, moving to contracts. Any questions on any of the 3 contracts? Okay, and then regular agenda items. Items A or B? C or D? Ms. Babb?
Yes, on D, and this is probably for Mr. Bolton. I was looking at the salary attached for it, and just wondering if that is, or I think that's a full package. Is that correct on the line, the funding item for that?
That would be based on average salary with benefits.
Okay, and so is that a kind of a top, I mean, is that a salary dependent on qualifications for the position?
Correct, and looking at, of course, there's some factors that would go into playing where that would fall on the salary scale. So that's why when the budget department looks at that FTE, they look at an average, when they budget an average amount for that.
Okay, and then is Mr. McPherson here? And you might not have the answer for this, but I think this is, actually, it's my fault that I should have asked you for this, because I think August numbers have come out, haven't they? Mm-hmm. Because I know this kind of is reflective, this ask on the fact that we think numbers are coming up. Do you have, if you don't have this information now, could we get it for next week about sort of how we're doing budget-wise?
Absolutely. We'll get the detailed projections to you. Yes, we've looked at, so we did get August, and it is, again, showing a surplus. Okay. We can extrapolate that all the way out to the end of the year. We're a little nervous about saying what we think that will be, other than because there's so much that could happen between now and then. It is showing a considerable surplus, though, but we can get you like hard numbers and our projections based on that. But so August looked really well. Also, July looked fantastic. Sure. August did not run to the surplus that necessarily July did. Still a surplus, though.
Yeah, if we could get that by next
Sure.
week, just because I think we keep kind of making decisions because we're better. I mean, we were so conservative because we had no idea what was going to happen.
Right.
Things are obviously better, which is great, but we keep having things that we're going to make decisions about. And so I think if we can have a sense of really how we're doing, and then look at things like this and the fact that we last time approved for the insurance, and just how those numbers are affecting us and how we're trending. And
we can do that, and we can actually even have a list for you if you'd like. So one thing, too, to keep in mind is not only is revenue at a surplus of what we had anticipated at this time, but we budgeted conservatively. So we budgeted $4 million more in revenue than we did in expenditures. So essentially what we were doing is budgeting to put dollars into our fund balance account too. But yeah, we do have some COVID expenditures, quite a bit, and I went over those before, but we think we're in pretty good shape. And so, yeah, we're kind of keeping track of that. So obviously we can't just go, keep throwing things at the board that, that hey, everything's great and wonderful, because that's not what we're saying.
And I'm sure you're keeping up with that, but I think there are things that we all would love to add back into the budget. But so I think just as we can all have a better sense of really, I think we're all thrilled how well the economy's doing. We hope that it continues, but to really have hard numbers that we can look at.
We can give projections. We can do that, and we can list our estimated COVID expenditures so far, and we can also put down what the board has already approved, like the insurance, and so we can be happy to do that.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
Any other questions, Mr. Watson?
Mr. Bolden, we're not going to let you sit down. So I know that this position is tied to our strategic plan. I mean, it's an important piece of that. So can you speak to the additional value that we'll have in having a position like this, how it plays into our strategic plan and what we can accomplish? Absolutely.
I think, we had this position and we, previously. It was lost because it was vacant at the time that the budget came through. We saw a lot of improvement, a lot of research in that position in terms of really, our goal is that our teaching demographic or our certified staff demographic will match that of our student demographic. And so, I talked to Bob earlier about, our numbers of diversity. I think, Bob, I think had prepared something to, I want to steal his thunder.
Yeah, just for a minute, if I can weigh in too. Of course, in the plan, we talk about the using multiple strategies to recruit and retain experienced educators at our high-need schools. We also talk about increasing partnerships and outreach efforts with historically black colleges and universities and Hispanic-serving institutions, and to also increase our certified staff of color. And approximately, just to give you some idea where we are right now, approximately 17% of our administrative promotions this year were African-American promotions. That represents about 14% of our school-based administrators in terms of being minorities. Approximately 6% of our certified staff are minorities, while our African-American student population is approximately 17%. So in looking at the differences there, and then when you look at our Hispanic student populations, it's about 11% and growing. and our Hispanic certified staff is approximately 1%. So you can see, again, the differences there. So we just need to do more in our efforts to recruit and retain employees of color so that, as Scott said, our certified employees more closely resembles the diversity of our student population. And so we feel like with this position, it's going to help us to do that. And again, there's some additional, you had a job description attached there, but just let me kind of expand on a few of the things in there with the job description. To design and develop and implement an approved educator prep program, to work to expand the educator prep program into other high-need subject areas. Also to build a teach as a profession program, and what that is, what we hope to do is identify students at Austin East and Fulton who have an interest in becoming teachers. We would then provide some early college opportunities for these students with the expectation that these opportunities would help compress the time that it takes to get a degree, because going through UT, you're talking about a 5-year program, so if we could compress that time. And then upon successful completion of the program, students would then be hired to teach in the district. So this is something, we talked about this years ago, and it never was able to come to fruition, but with full scholarships, 4-year scholarships being provided for students at Austin East and Fulton, it's now a reality. So to identify those students, and we know that in recruiting, what is the mileage, Scott? Probably 300 miles if you're recruiting. Most people don't relocate more than about 300 miles maybe from where they grew up. So if we can identify folks that live here, grew up here, to be in our teaching staff, then I think that's a good way in terms of growing your own. So also we have a recruitment there, and this person would be responsible for doing that. And then we're looking at revamping our hiring process in terms of making that more transparent process for applicants. If you're a teacher and you aspire to get into an administrative position, how do I go about doing that? What is that process? And Scott, and we can do this for the board at sometime maybe a little bit later to talk about how we're revamping that process to make it a lot more transparent. So this person would work within that process and also be responsible for sitting in on interviews and making helping to make decisions for promotions and things of that nature. So I think, if it hadn't been for the budget situation last year, what we thought, we would have never done away. We worked really too hard to get this position in the budget, and then to lose it, and again, for very good reason from a standpoint that we didn't know where we would be, so it made sense to take vacant positions and eliminate those at the time and then come back and restore. So I really think that in terms of our efforts in human resources, to have a person dedicated, full-time, go to bed thinking about, wake up thinking about, hey, what can we do as a school district to recruit minorities and to retain our minorities. And of course, part of the strategic plan, we talked about the Minority Advisory Council, which we've had a few meetings already this year, and that group is very interested in working with HR too, and this person in terms of recruiting, and they've really helped us come up with some pretty good ideas. I know our last meeting was very productive when folks talked about some of their ideas. Hey, have you thought of this? Would you be interested in doing this? And yes, we are interested in, and we want to do that because we've got to work on these numbers and have a certified staff that's more representative of our student body. So.
Well, I'm very appreciative of you and the team identifying this as a strategic need to bring back in to the board for consideration. So thank you.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, and Ms. Babb?
Just a quick question. Do you know which of our high schools has the largest Hispanic population, since that seems to be the really big gap that we have?
You talking about the teaching?
No, student body-wise,
Student body.
which high school would have the largest Hispanic population?
Just by ethnicity? We can.
I was just curious if we know if it's Fulton or Austin.
Dr. Reiswick, do you have a quick answer
or just a good guess?
I'll give you 2 answers. How about that?
I'll be impressed if you know.
So the largest by number of students, Central. The largest by percentage of students, Fulton.
Wow, I'm impressed. Okay.
I guess the reason I ask about that is when we're looking at the Fulton and Austin East program, it does look like we really are trying to target Hispanic, that maybe Central maybe should possibly be thought about that too. I don't know.
I was just going to say this. I mean, good news. I'm a dad of 2 kids at Central. So I'm super happy it's a flagship school now for UT full rides. That's really good. I didn't know that was coming. I think we've always kind of talked about those kinds of schools in that. So, Scott could look at that too. Let me say this too. The main Austin East growth is in Corundy. So it's a very different, like refugee populations that's driven up that ELL population. So, it's kind of unique at that school for that one.
Okay, thank you.
Any other?
And
Yes.
Scott and I did have a conversation about that this afternoon, so I think that's a great suggestion. But now that Central is into the mix in terms of the full 4-year scholarship, so.
Great. Yeah, that's good news. Okay. Any other questions on that item? Okay. Let's see. We are on E. Jennifer, is that one?
Thank you. In the charter monitoring report, I'm looking down at the bottom at the suspension rates, the student attrition rates, and the teacher retention rates. Do we have any comparison to past year numbers?
Ms. Jackson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. We have the past year's monitoring. It's very difficult for us to draw comparisons because the number of days that we're using is so different that it really is not an apples to apples comparison. So we're hesitant to do too much with that number other than continuing to work with Emerald, and that is an area where they're putting a tremendous amount of time and focus.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on this item? Okay. Moving to F. G. Okay, and then Lonsdale H. I've asked, we've had some questions on Lonsdale and the number of classrooms and that kind of thing. So I think Mr. Oakes is going to come and speak. And if you'll just kind of walk, I think you're aware of kind of what the questions from the community and what some of the staff questions have been. If you'll just kind of walk us through the kind of how we got to where we are and what the conversation is at the present.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll start and talk about it at a very high level. If we want to get into details, Mr. Dillingham is here to talk to program standards in detail and process in detail. And Ms. Thompson is here to talk about curricular aspects. But some of the questions that we have been asked have been around the number of classrooms that you mentioned, have been around ELL, have been around presence of a tech lab that immediately come to mind. And I just want to say, when we begin and we build a school, we build it to the board's program standards. And those standards are designed so that every school that we build in the county will have the same elements within it at the same level, so that an elementary school that we build in Lonsdale has the same elements within the building, within the structure, that an elementary school that we would build in the northwest part of the county would have, or in the northeast part of the county. So when we begin the process, what we do is we'll look at our growth projections. And right now let me, just to give you some context, and these are based on the middle of September numbers that we pulled. Lonsdale, and when I say Lonsdale, I'm talking about Lonsdale and Sammy Hill as a group, but Lonsdale had a K-5 enrollment of 453 students. We're projecting over the next 4 or 5 years that they will grow to about 510 students. So that's a growth of about 50 students over that time frame. The current school, as it's designed, has 30 classrooms, and it also has, excuse me if I can remember what I'm doing here. It also has, of course, art, music. It has 2 CDC classrooms, which are part of our program standard. Of course, has PE and a library. And when you look at that, you look at the capacity. When we calculate capacity for an elementary school, when we're in the construction phase, we look at grades K3, and those we calculate a capacity of 20 to 1 or 20 students per classroom because that's the state maximum BEP. When we look at grades 4 and 5, we can make that calculation at 25 to 1. So that gives you a straight building capacity right there. As we know, there's really not any difference in a third grade classroom and a fourth grade classroom as far as facility is concerned. So just for a shorthand internally within the office, we may use a number of 22.5 per classroom to give you some approximation of what the capacity of the facility is or what the max capacity is. And you remember back when we had the board extended work session a month or so ago, we talked a little bit about capacity and how capacity is calculated and the different ways you can calculate it. But based on that, what we've got right now is a calculated capacity of the facility as it's currently designed for 675 students. Some question about the tech lab. We haven't designed schools with tech labs in years. I think we're confident that being a one-to-one district now, all of our classrooms can become tech labs, and all of our students can work in that environment. With respect to and Mr. Dillingham, I'm probably going to ask him to speak to this in a little more detail. But when we look at ELL is not a component of the program standard. Doesn't mean it can't be. That would really take a recommendation and an action from the board directing us to include that as a program standard. You can make arguments why it should be a program standard, and you make arguments why it shouldn't be a program standard based on how the ELL program is implemented at various schools around the county. So with that, if it pleases the board chair, I'd like to let Mr. Dillingham talk a little bit about the program standards, the design process, and where we are in that.
Certainly, that'd be great. Thank you, Mr. Oakes.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. Our program standards were established back in the mid to late 1990s, and I'll tell you, they were Cadillac at the time. Over the years, at the direction of the board, we have gone in, we have taken a look at where we could trim square footage to save construction dollars, and it's all based on the cost of construction, which I think most people will know can vary at any given time. But what we have right now is standards that we have downsized classrooms, mainly by taking out some of the cubby areas that we used to have designed in their teachers' office areas. And this was done probably 5 or 6 years ago. Well, probably even longer than that, when we were designing the Carter Elementary School project. So we have tried to kind of maintain those standards since then. We still look at it on a school by school basis, and you know, with these standards, they're very explicit as far as what we provide in each classroom, number of outlets, the number of data ports, and all of that. It's extremely explicit. We do have to massage it every once in a while. But bottom line, where we are right now is that our classrooms are pretty much interchangeable. We especially had to do a modification for Lonsdale because we're building 2-story. Our previous standards, the K1 classrooms, were a little bit larger than the 2 through 5, but when you're building 2-story and you're stacking them, you've got to make them all the same size from a construction standpoint. So what we did was we downsized the K1 a little bit, and we upsized the 2 through 5 a little bit so that they're the same size, and it's something that we could probably build one of each side by side and take you in, and you would not be able to tell the difference in the two unless you pulled out a tape measure or something like that. So we feel very confident with the classroom sizes we have now, and that is not only something that we implemented at Lonsdale, but we also have included it in our Adrian Burnett project and our Northwest Elementary School project. So classrooms are all the same size. As Mr. Oaks said, our program standards define components, and we put those components together to best fit the site that we have, but we're trying to make sure that everything is equivalent across the county, and that's been our intent since I've been with the school system for a little over 19 years. So, Mr. Oaks mentioned ELL. ELL is different at every school, or can be different at every school. It is actually a pull-out program, so it's not a part of the program standards where you identify classrooms for that to happen. It's something that is addressed at the school level on how they use their facility. And I will let people a whole lot smarter than me talk about how they use facilities at the school level. The Lonsdale being unique in the fact that we're combining Sammy Hill, which previously was a pre-K facility and now contains pre-K classrooms along with K and 1. We tweaked our program standards on this project slightly to include some pre-K classrooms in. Ordinarily on a 600 capacity elementary school, we would design 10 K1 classrooms. What we have here is we added 2 classrooms to the standards to take care of pre-K classrooms that exist at Sammy Hill now. Again, that's an anomaly. We do not have pre-K everywhere. Pre-K is not a part of our program standards. Pre-K classrooms are the same size as kindergarten classrooms, that are the same size as first grade classrooms, so they're all interchangeable. So again, it gets back to the use of facility as determined by the local school administration. So any questions on any of that?
Anybody have questions? I have a question. Go ahead, Ms. Babbitt.
I have several.
Question. Okay.
Mr. Oaks was talking about the ratios of 25 to 1 and 20 to 1. I know at some of our higher need schools, our ratios are a lot smaller. Is that the smaller ratio, or is that what we're using across the county as our ratio? Because I would think our ratios would be smaller at Lonsdale, but I don't know. We are directed, under our current direction by the board, to design the program standards, which call for us to design the BEP standards. So we are designing to the 20 to 1 capacity at K through 3 and 25 to 1 at 4 and 5. So we do not take into account staffing ratios or anything like that. Again, we're trying to standardize across the system, make sure everybody is getting basically the same thing, and that is the way that you can do that. I guess that's a little bit of my concern is we're saying standard across it, but we already know what the Lonsdale community is. We know a lot of their uniqueness, like their very high ELL population, that why we're not taking some of those considerations in. And I mean, I know Mr. Oaks and I had this conversation about an ELL classroom can look the same as a first grade classroom or second grade classroom, but I don't understand, and this is where I'm hearing a lot from the teachers and administration and stuff, but I don't know as a board member how they're using it. So when I look at the classrooms and we're looking at 30, it looks like there's 30 classrooms, is that correct? But if, because of their population, they are staffing at a lower ratio and feel like they will continue to do so, things like that, I guess it concerns me a little bit when we just, and maybe y'all can address that. I mean, if you already know that no matter what, we're going to tell them whether it's right for your population or not, you're going to do 25-1, even though you've never done that. That's what's concerning me here.
I think we're confusing design and operation a little bit, and understand too that staffing ratios can change in any school from year to year at any time. That's not a static number. What is static are the bricks and mortar, largely speaking, and how you have to work with that. Can we consider those things? Certainly, but I think it requires the guidance of the Board of Ed for us to do it because it's outside the program standard. So we can do what the Board of Ed wants to do with respect to that, or whatever the sense of the board is with respect to that. Let me give you an example. And I've talked to this a time or two before. Normally when we design a school, we'll design expansion space into this. And Lonsdale is not different in that respect. We have designed expansion space there. So if the board wanted to provide Lonsdale additional space, and I'm not arguing that they don't need it, but because Lonsdale is somewhat anomalous, particularly in its ELL population. I think they probably have the highest per capita ELL population of any of our elementary schools. So if the board wanted to look at that, it would be giving us a direction to do that. We have contingency to add additional classrooms, and we could do that within this current plan, but we didn't feel that it was our place to add 6 classrooms or add 8 classrooms that were outside the program standard. But if the board wants to do that, that's certainly something that we can do at the board's direction.
I guess I feel like I need more information about how they currently use it, because I think my biggest fear is we look at our portable situation all over the place, and I don't want 3 years from now to be that school be surrounded by portables.
That's not possible.
There's no room.
Well, there's no room. Okay, so yes, there's no room. But you get what I'm saying, though. I mean, it's that we don't think it through enough to do the expansion. And I don't know. I mean, I am not an expert in this area. I'm not the expert to say, oh yes, they need the area. But there are a couple other things I wanted to ask about too.
Well, let me answer one thing before you leave from that. If you want to talk about operation of the building, I know Ms. Thompson and Ms. Parton are both here, and they can certainly address that and discuss that in some detail.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps that would help if we hear from Ms. Thompson on the current number of classrooms that are utilized, or if the principal's here, the current number of classrooms that are utilized and how ELL is happening, and to kind of get a sense of that.
And if we feel that 30 is going to meet the needs for the foreseeable future.
Whoever would like to come. And then I know we have other questions, so just kind of hold your questions and let's see if maybe some of them are answered. So, because I know I have a lot of the same questions you probably do. Okay, hi, thank you for being here.
I'll just talk a little bit about what it looks like now at Lonsdale. We have, and this is 2 through 5, not considering Sammy Hill, we have currently 5 teachers who they have classrooms that can be anywhere between about 9 students on a low end to up to about 14 kids on a high end. And they are in a portable right now, and they have some of them have to share a portable, and some of them do have a portable by themselves, but there is some sharing there, some love there amongst themselves. And so they have about 5 rotations of that many kids in a day. So they literally have a classroom that functions throughout the whole day. They'll meet with group 1, which could be anywhere between 8 and, the 14 children, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then, to give them the planned time and all of that. That's for a full day. I believe there's about 144 kids that they serve altogether, 2 through 5. So when I think about that and I look at the new school that we saw and the plans, so first of all, I'm super excited. We feel like it's Christmas. And I look at what we have now as far as the number of grade levels. It appears as if we have about 3 classrooms that could be what I call repurposed or looked at, even though it said first grade or second grade or third grade. We have about 3 that I could have that discretion to use for an ELL room. We have 2 CDC classrooms in there that it's possible that one of those could be used for that space, just kind of thinking it through. So that would be a possibility of about 4 classrooms that we could look at and kind of change it up. And so that's kind of what I'm looking at right now. I think there are would be 7 total ELL teachers when the 2 schools combine. So that could look like, would you have a classroom per teacher? Would there be some sharing? Would there be some, possibility with technology that we can use to kind of create spaces within those spaces? Those are the things that are the challenges, I think, that we would look at.
Well, and can I ask a question about if you have 5 to 14 kids per classroom, if it is one teacher, do you need the same space as a regular classroom that is built for 20 kids? Or could a smaller space work? Like, is it, I'm just thinking about could the space be, if we could, reconfigure that space, would that be beneficial?
It would be beneficial. We have some interventions that kind of run that way too for RTI, where they have that, about 5 to 6 kids in a group. So space-wise, we could make that happen. I think the teachers really, they are like classroom teachers at Lonsdale. They really run a program where they have whole group, even within those number of kids, where they will teach a whole group and then try to actually break out in small groups. So that does take some space that's needed. So to have a table with 12 kids in a smaller space might be hard to do. You know how a classroom teacher would like that space, plus I can meet in small groups here or there.
Okay.
Does that answer
Okay.
Yeah.
That answers my question. Okay. All right. Do you have any other questions, Ms. Babb?
So I think what I'm getting from you is how y'all currently use Sammy Hill and Lonsdale. You're not going to have the space currently as the school is configured to do it the way you're doing it now. You would have to reconfigure groups or things like. Is that kind of what I'm hearing, or?
We would, with the 4 rooms, we would have to look at somebody having to share space and maybe using technology to have, presenting content the way teachers do, whether it's an active board or, a media TV or something like that, and creating space where they would still have to share. But there could be possibilities where 1 or 2 would be able to have that full space.
Okay.
Because,
So 4 classrooms between 7 teachers. Okay.
Well, you're up here too. I guess this is another question I have. I actually, a few years ago, before community schools started in Knox County, I went on a field trip up to Cincinnati. And we kind of looked at their model, and their whole thing was they built their schools to work as community schools, and they were doing a huge building, and it was really cool what they did because they were starting from scratch. Basically, they just start over. So as I'm looking at the fact that we're building a new Lonsdale, do you feel like the school has the space needed to work well with the community school needs that are working there?
That's a hard question to answer because we saw it just for the first time on Friday. I know that there's that section right there that could be used for community schools, and there's the rec center there, and just kind of trying to get my bearings on that. So I don't know that I can fully answer that because I know there's still some conversation about, what does that space look like right there. So, You know, I'm talking about the pink, I call it the hot pink
Sure.
space.
And I guess that's where, I mean, and I think Ms. Satterfield brought this up a couple of times of really hoping that we were going to the community and
Yeah.
going to the school as we were designing it. And I sort of feel like we have designed the school and now y'all are looking at it. I do, before approving this, I wish, and this is not probably at you, this is probably talking to the design people, that we're really making sure this does work for this community. I mean, if we're going to spend this money, let's do it right. I mean, you know, obviously we have budget constraints and, you know, you can't just do whatever you want to. One other question I have is, with all this one-to-one technology that, you know, we didn't have this years ago in elementary schools. And when we talk, and this might be a Mr. Dillingham question, and we're talking about the standards that we had. As we're going forward, are our standards meeting the needs for all this technology that we're going to have in all these elementary schools that we've never had before? And this is kind of a new question as of this summer with all the one-to-one capability that's out there. Are our schools going to keep up with all that?
Well, and I have a question that may be related to that, because I think I heard you say, Mr. Dillingham, that a few years ago, that the board's direction was to decrease the cubby space and the teacher office space. Is that correct? So I think the cubby question could come into play in that, because as a principal, I would like to hear, and you can, if they're not related, we can answer that question and come back to this one. But I'm just curious, you know, how does that work for students, for classrooms to not have a cubby space and a teacher office? And I know Mr. Dillingham has some conversation on that also, but okay. So if we can just kind of address those issues, and I would love to hear from the principal on that question too. But Mr. Dillingham, if you want to go ahead, and then I'd love to hear from the principal.
Okay, as far as the technology is concerned, yes, I think we're staying up with the times, if you will. We have a tremendous IT group here with the school system, and they go in, we put in the number of ports, wireless ports in each classroom that they recommend. They test it, they make sure it works, and as far as I know, we've got all the bandwidth that we need on these, and I think we're fine with having everything one-to-one and wireless, which has been talked about for years, and we're finally at that point. Now, to address the cubbies are still there.
Okay.
They are not in their own little special section. What you will have, and you can go to Inskip Elementary and take a look, Moreland Heights, what we do is we put the cubbies along the corridor wall, if you will, down low. They have coat hooks underneath, and then we put enclosed cabinets, wall cabinets, actually 2 rows above that, and take them all the way to the ceiling. That gives them some out-of-season storage up high. That gives them some usable storage down below. That gives each student a cubby plus a place to hang their backpacks. We actually have measured, and we install the bottom of the cubby so that the coat hooks underneath work with the backpacks on the individual grade level.
And so would there be a space there, like if they wanted to store their Chromebook, that they could store the Chromebook?
Well, Chromebooks are kind of new to us
right
now.
I know, yeah.
So the cubbies are basically 12 by 12. I don't know if you want children storing their Chromebooks in that space, but I think it would accommodate it.
Okay. All right. And what about teacher offices, Mr. Dillingham?
That's something that was changed several years ago. I don't know if you remember when Dr. McIntyre was here, and we did a lot of traveling around looking at different design of different facilities, because we were being told that we paid way too much money for our facilities, and et cetera, et cetera. So we walked into, you can take a look at AL Lots. Gibbs Elementary School was probably the last one about 14 years ago that we designed with the offices. Most of the offices, the design were 2 classrooms and created a suite that had the offices in between. Well, we found that the offices were being used for storage.
Yeah.
And the teacher wanted a desk out in the classroom. So That was one way we cut out the offices, the cubby space and all that, and saved a bunch of square footage doing that. So that's how we were able to massage some of the square footage out to get construction costs down.
And some of that storage, the upper level cabinets, so the thought is that hopefully that's going to suffice for the storage issue
Right, I would,
with the lack of having that space between the two classrooms. Do you
well,
know what I mean? The original
the
teacher.
space between the two classrooms was never designed for storage.
Right.
It was just used for that. We actually designed some storage closets in that same space going across, and I would venture to guess that the amount of actual storage that you have in those cabinets would be equivalent to the closet that was in with 5 shelves.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm not sure who had a question first. Ms. Satterfield, it's your school. Would you like to go first?
Yeah, I just have a quick question as they continue to develop, and this is a very specific question, so if we can just get an estimate, that works too. But since the program standards were first, the 1990 date to now, what has been the ELL population growth throughout the county since the 90s? Do we have that, or just an estimate?
I don't have that, and I don't know, if we could go back that far and find ELL population, but I would hazard a guess that it's been significant.
For some time.
Yeah.
We'd be glad to take a look at it, see how far we can.
And the reason, and I agree, it probably is pretty much significant across the entire county, and so I will continue, we can continue to have discussion, but I am interested in adding ELL board standards into our board standards, because I do think that it's going to be something across the board for Knox County as we continue to move, but we can continue to have discussion.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Ms. Owen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have several different questions for different people. First, I want to just clarify. What you're looking at now at Lonsdale is 5 classrooms that you're using for ELL rotation, 2nd through 5th grade. So that's not including kindergarten, kindergarten and first. It's just 2nd through 5th, right?
Right now, we have portables behind there,
Right.
and there are 4 portables out there, and each of the teachers have a space in a portable, but we have 5, and the 5th one has to share amongst those. So there's times when there's 2 groups going, and they have a connector space between, and sometimes they're pulling students to work in there to have some separation from the other group.
Okay, so let me say that a different way then. You currently have 4 spaces and you need 5, but the new plan only has 3?
3 classrooms that were the pre-K through 5, and then we have a CDC. We have 2 CDC rooms that we could probably repurpose that into something else.
And where's your RTI intervention meeting?
So there is a area in the bottom part of the map that has a lot of itinerant office space, suites. There's, Counselor, there's some room in there that we could actually have small groups and kind of look at some of the other spaces for the itinerant folks to do there, some small groups for RTI, since they kind of stay in that small group and don't really move around as much as like what would happen in a general classroom.
All right, so you feel like there would be enough space for your RTI folks?
I think so, yes.
Okay, thank you. Do we know when the program standards were last updated, when those were looked at?
Ms. Owen, the last time that we took an in-depth look at them was when we were designing the Carter Elementary School. So 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago, 7 or 8 years ago. Carter and North Shore were built at the same time, and we went through at that time and did a very in-depth look at them. So that was the last time that we have gone to that depth on the program standards. As I said, each time we design a school, we're always looking for ways to be able to save money on them, and so we're constantly looking at what we can massage a little bit. And also, you know, as I said, the program standards establish the components, but the components may go together differently depending on our site limitations and all that. So you're not always going to have the same design at every site, and sometimes just the design itself has an effect on how you do things, and needing to massage things a little bit to make them work from a construction standpoint, constructability standpoint.
And I appreciate the effort to look at things that we no longer need to save those funds. And it makes sense to me that we might not include a technology lab because that's something that's becoming outdated. But I think as we're looking at those things that we no longer need, there are other things that we are growing to need. And while it's a great effort to look at those things where we can save money, or maybe some places where we need to spend more.
And I don't disagree with that. We have implemented or inserted some things. What comes to mind is geothermal, the use of that in our facilities. We added to our program standards just a statement that we would take a look at geothermal on all of our projects to see if it was feasible, to see if we could get a return on investment on it and all of that. So it's very general, but it's specific that we have to look at it at each project. And in my opinion, if we do the same thing with ELL, it's not a part of the program standards that we have to include in every school, but we look at it on every project to see if it is needed and whether or not we need to add space to accommodate that. So the main reason it's not in there right now is because it is pulled out. Lonsdale has a tremendous population that needs the service, which is unusual for Knox County and some of our other elementary facilities. So that would be my recommendation, is a direction from the board to take a look at it rather than mandating it through program standards where we have to put it in every school where it may not be needed. So again, going back to the question about the actual space that's needed, yeah, we can design smaller spaces for these pull-outs. In my opinion, if at all possible, you're better off if you leave them classroom size so that it just adds flexibility to the use of your facility.
Right.
So I don't, you may not need it all day, every day, but at the same time, it gives you some flexibility for your student-teacher ratio. And it gives you some flexibility for intervention, for ELL, but it also gives you the flexibility that if your population starts growing, then you already have the classrooms there to accommodate that. And then you're back in the boat of trying to find some place to do ELL intervention.
Thank you. Mr. Dubler? Hi, I haven't seen you today. I guess my next question is, for them to have direction to look at it, do we need to, at the next meeting, actually look at a potential motion to do that? Or would they just need sort of consensus from us as they're talking about things to look at that?
Mr. Duper.
Thank you, Ms. Owen. Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I mean, you all are approving tonight what's my understanding is a preliminary schematic. You know, and Mr. Oakes can correct me if I'm wrong, but changes can still be made. I mean, but I think if you're going to want Mr. Dillingham and Mr. Oakes and their teams to go ahead and, you know, and positively take a look at that, then you all need to probably add that in. I mean, from what I can tell, and again, Mr. Oakes, you correct me if I'm wrong, the board could approve this preliminarily, but also ask that the ELL space be looked at in more detail.
Yeah, let me do that. Just a little clarification, and then I've got a suggestion. With respect to the schematic diagram, this is not preliminary. I mean, it is but it does not mean that what gets built is down to the nth degree what's in this drawing, because as you get into the process, you may have to tweak that some. But what happens at this point is the board approves the schematic diagram, and then the architects can go back and start doing construction drawings, and we can get, in this particular case, because remember, this is a design-build project that's being managed by the county. They will have to go back and, of course, do the construction drawings, do the estimates on cost, so that they can put that together and provide it to us, and we can review the budget. So that's where we are in the process, and that's really the impetus behind approving a schematic design for the school. With respect to ELL, and Mr. Dillingham and I have had a long conversation about this, and I think I had a passing conversation with the superintendent about this the other day. And he can shoot me when I get off on the wrong foot here. But I think at this point in time, the most expeditious way forward is if the board would direct us to build out Lonsdale Elementary School to add an additional 6 classrooms that are already within our expansion vision. And include that. It would take Lonsdale to, by the way we measure it, an 800 student school. It's got an 800 student core designed already, and what it, and for all intents and purposes, would do is it would max out Lonsdale Elementary School and that site forever. We could never come back and really do anything else to that school. So if you directed us to do that, then there's a cost to that. We don't know what the cost is yet. We won't know until the contractor can go through the process and cost that out. I can tell you that we're comfortable that we've got money in the total project budget to cover the bricks and mortar, regardless of what that cost comes back. Where we may be 18 months from now down the road is needing to put some more money in that project in order to cover things like furniture, fixtures, and equipment, some technology, some security, if there are those kind of things. How much that is, I don't know yet, but we would need to adjust it, and I'm going to refrain from speculating on what the cost might be, because as soon as I do, I'll get it wrong. But I think that's the most expeditious way forward with respect to Lonsdale. I think if you do that, you also need to direct us to take a look at Adrian Burnett and see if it has a need. And like the Lonsdale plan, the Adrian Burnett plan has an expansion vision to it that we could look at that if we needed to add some additional space. And anybody in the construction industry will tell you that it's cheaper to add space right now than it will ever be in the future, while you're mobilized to do that, and while you're still moving lines on paper, not moving blocks on the ground. So that would be our suggestion and our preference to go forward.
Okay, Mr. Watson. Ms. Owen, did you have all your questions answered?
I was just going to follow up. That is something we would need to direct next week, right?
Right. So I think we would make a substitute motion, or add to the motion, and vote on it that way.
And then we have Mr. Dillingham just reminded me, and then once we do that, that gets these 2 projects moving. We've got direction to do those, and then we can have a separate conversation or a separate process about how we want to amend program standards.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Watson?
Yep, Mr. Oaks, I appreciate that. I've talked to Mr. Dillingham quite a bit about this, and that was going to be a suggestion that I would consider that we look at for the very purpose of it will never get cheaper to build out that space. And if it's space that we can use, even if our population growth doesn't dictate that, you said in 5 years we might be at 550 or something like that. But from a programming standpoint, I think that's really important to look at. I've got a few comments that are more broad about the way we're designing and constructing in general. I know in the construction industry, you all have tremendous amounts of issues and competing interests and all those different things that you have to look at, all the way from the site that we're on to regulations to who the stakeholders are. And so, you all have a tremendous amount to navigate, and I appreciate you all doing that for our students and for our parents and for our educators. I'm assuming, I don't know this to be true, but I'm assuming that when those design standards were approved in the 90s and we moved to more of let's try to make sure that every community when we build a school has pretty much the same thing, and that comment has been referenced a few different times, is because our lower income communities probably were not getting very good schools at that point. I'm assuming historically that was what was happening, or at least that was the concern of the community. Community is, we can't give a lower income community less than what we're giving a higher income community or something like that. I'm sure it has something to do with disparities. Is that true?
I don't know. I wasn't here then.
Sure.
Mr. Thomas was around, but I don't know if that was even in his area of responsibility at the time. So, it could be. What I can tell you, based on, the anecdotal information we get today. Yeah. Every area of the county thinks some other area of the county is getting more than they do. Sure. And, so I don't think that dynamic has changed in the last 200 years.
Yes, that's probably true. So I think there's a little bit of, I think when we go that direction too far, we actually end up underserving people unintentionally because we don't always consider the unique needs of a given community. When we do that, and I'm not saying that's you guys doing that, I'm just saying from a philosophical standpoint, I think sometimes we miss the mark, and I think that's why we've had so much conversation tonight about ELL when it comes to Lonsdale. Mr. Dillingham, you had suggested, you had said the last time we looked at these were about 6 or 7 years ago. When you say we, who do you mean? Has the board presented the program standards in that amount of time, or?
When I say we, I mean me.
Right. Okay.
Because
yeah.
I'm probably the only one in my department of 3 that
sure
has the capability of doing that. It was presented to the board basically as a part of the Carter package, and so kind of in a roundabout way. I don't know that we actually presented the standards to them.
Sure.
If we did, I'm not real sure that anybody read it because they're about that thick.
Right.
But at the same time, they were presented to the board as a part of that Carter package and the Carter design, and was approved at that time.
Yeah. But in the 90s, the board did take a deep dive into it with support and things like that, correct? That
absolutely. They actually hired Cotts Binkley Jones and Morris, who is an architectural firm that no longer has a presence in Knoxville. They're down in Mount Juliet, but they hired them to put together the standards, and they dealt with Miss Sarah Simpson. And even today, even though Ms. Simpson's no longer with us, I still cringe when I think about modifying the program standards in any way.
Right.
I'm afraid she's going to come back and haunt me.
So I'm not going to speak in layman's terms, so excuse me on that. But if we have a set of program standards, let's say that sets the minimum standard, right, for any particular school, given the grade band, is it possible that in addition to that, there could be something, again, this is where I'm going to use the wrong terms, a la carte, where it says, given the unique population of this community, we might also then add in this. We might take a particular look at ELL or this particular issue. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
I think it's very doable to do that.
Right.
Again, if it's left general.
Sure, right.
So that we don't have to include it in every design that we do. then I think it's something that we can take a look at on each specific project to see if there is actually a need to do it. So.
And here's why I think that's an important consideration as we move forward, is I know one of the other issues that I heard in this particular process is people in the Lonsdale community, many of them felt like they didn't have a voice and they weren't able to speak into it, right? Well, I think part of the reasons why we do that practically is because you can't have 50 people who don't know about construction telling you how to build something, right?
Oh, yes, we can.
but it's not
And
very,
we do.
it's not very effective or efficient, right? Because there's all
No,
kinds of...
and that's why we have the program standards.
Right.
And that's usually what I tell people when they want us to include something else, something different
Right.
and all that. I said, well, we have the standards that we design around
Right.
so that everybody, regardless of where you are in the county, you're getting basically the same facility.
It sounds like I'm trying to solve this, but I'm not. I'm kind of giving some ideas. So my thought is if the program standards were more about the minimums and then you had this a la carte given a community specific needs, then you could involve some public process in that to say, all right, given your particular needs, what are the additional things that we've already accounted for as possibilities could be added into the mix of the design of your school? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I will tell you that normally we at least, I will say in the past, and COVID-19 had an effect on these three
Sure.
projects
Yeah.
we're doing right now. In the past, what I typically try to do is schedule a meeting to come and present what we're doing to a regular PTA meeting and have the staff show up as well so that we do get the feedback, not just from the staff and the principal, but also the people that are highly involved in the school itself, which is typically what you find with the PTAs and the PTSOs.
But even with the ability of getting some of that feedback, at this point, the community could not possibly suggest a major change that we might take. I mean, it would be fairly minor things that we might be able to address.
Right,
Correct?
and what I try to tell our designers when they start designing, our program standards are actually guidelines.
Sure.
Again, if you know anything about design, as you start putting together the pieces and the parts, exact sizes don't always work, and especially if you're dealing with masonry and modular components and you know, that type thing. So instead of 25 feet, you want it to be 25.4 because that's your block forcing. So, you know, there are different things like that the smart guys, the architects, they know all about those things. So there's some tweaking and adjustment, and then how things fit together at corridor intersections and things like that you have to take a look at. And you may not be able to get 100 square feet in a space that the program asks for, but you may be able to get 97 square feet in it. So, you know, they are guidelines and there is room for adjustment, and part of my job is to review these designs and make sure that they are going to function for our schools and our staff that we put in them.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you guys for the work that you all do. And again,
you.
I would advocate that we look for some ways to be able to involve more public in the process in tangible ways, and then also look at how can we move from a minimum standards to also giving some flexibility, more flexibility, where the people who program those schools and the communities themselves can have some input in terms of the additional items in the design. So,
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Watson. We have Ms. Babb and then Mr. McMillan.
Okay, and I'm not going to try to run this in the ground, but I really agree with what Mr. Watson said. And I have to say, I think about half this board probably was involved with the Carter. Were you here for? Okay, a lot of us have never gone through this process before, and I have to say, I think almost a little education for some of us on how it works, because I feel like I'm learning as I'm going.
Be happy to.
And that maybe is my own fault not to ask the questions ahead of time. But like, I look at the fact that we had the community meeting the other night and then we're all of a sudden voting on it, and it feels very rushed. And I look at like Adrian Burnett, and maybe it is the COVID times that are causing this. And I think Adrian Burnett is much like Lonsdale in that you've got programming that's already going on. They know how they kind of run their school, what they need, that type of stuff. And I really hope that, especially as we go to Adrian Burnett, we really have those conversations with their community and with their leadership teams and stuff like that, because they know how they use their space. And so I guess I would like to kind of, as Mr. Watson said, try to have some standards, but look at how we really need to do it correctly for that group and not, and try to do it as best we can at the forefront. Like we've said, it's much easier to build it out now, or not easier, but than to ever add on 5 years from now.
And I'd remind you, the board's already approved the schematic design for Adrian Burnett Elementary School. So that project is further along in development than this project is. So, I mean, it doesn't mean that we can't go back and make changes at this point. The other thing, and this comes from 40 years of experience of trying to manage projects of different types, is I learned a long time ago, you never go to a committee meeting with a blank piece of paper. You'll never get out. So our program standards allow us not to have a blank piece of paper, and we can certainly do whatever the sense of the board is. I would just caution that we don't want to get ourselves into a position where every time we build a school, it's a new experience. It needs to be consistent in what we're doing.
Yes. Okay, Mr. McMillan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to make a couple of comments here, some in reference to how we got here. I mean, 2 or 3 times things have been mentioned about the 90s. I think on the heels of the 80s, what we were trying to find, generally speaking, was some uniformity, where maybe that we could use, if we had a school that we were building for 500 to 800 kids in one part of the county, we could use a similar design. Now I've had, and I still have one today. A lot of these elementary schools were built by the old WPA during the 30s and the 40s. Corrigan is still there. They had the same, generally the same design. They were 6 rooms with 8 grades, and we've got portables at Corrigan, But I guess what I want to say is, I would prefer that we stay general. I think it's worked real well. They built, when I say they, I'm talking about Russ and Doug and others that are under them. They built 2 complete schools in the last decade in the 8th district, and they've also done major renovation. Now you correct me if I'm wrong, Doug. Major renovation at Rita and some renovation at Chilhowie. Although Chilhowie is not in the district, we send our kids down there. And I've never had anybody complain to me about that. So I guess what I'm saying is, don't get into the minutia. I understand what you're talking about, and people should have an opportunity, and I agree with that. But at the same time, keep in mind that these are professional people. They know what they're doing, but you got to give them some flexibility. If there's something that's really needed, then they can come back, bring it before the board, and we can deal with it then. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McMillan. Mr. Watson?
Yeah, just to be clear, I appreciate that, Mr. McMillan. I'm not advocating for more specificity. I'm actually advocating for more flexibility. So.
Okay. Thank you. And, I think we do have we're going to be going through this process again before too long. So hopefully, you guys can educate us a little bit more on what the current program standards are and if there are any recommendations for any changes, or if there just need to be some additions that just specify that you look at flexible items such as ELL populations or whatever. So I think the flexibility is important, and we can accomplish both things. And I agree with Mr. Oakes. We definitely don't need a blank sheet of paper at a community meeting. I think that would be asking for big trouble. Mr. McMillan.
Just one quick comment. Since some people are new, and even of the people that are here, some of you have not gone through building a school. Maybe sometime after the first of the year that Doug and Russ maybe could schedule an hour, and just anybody that wants to come, and this is what we do. Would that, think y'all could work that in your schedule?
We may need more than an hour.
Well, you can start there.
Okay, we'll talk about that. We'll discuss that and see if we can.
It was just a suggestion.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. I think the more information we have before we have to make decisions, the better off we are. So that's very helpful. And thank you all. Thank you to Ms. Thompson and the principal, and for both of you for answering all of our questions tonight. I think that hopefully that's given us the information that we need to make decisions for Lonsdale. Okay, and that is the last item, so I will turn to Ms. Babb for public forum.
Sure. I would like to call Mr. Lance McCold. Please state your name and county of residence.
Lance McCold, Knox County. Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. Can you hear me all right? I'd like to speak about item 13D, the Human Resources Diversity and Advancement position. Knox County Schools has far too few minority teachers and staff. We definitely need to give minority hiring and advancement more attention. On the other hand, this proposed hire points to a serious problem this board needs to address. By my count, this is the fourth unbudgeted item the administration has brought to you, but there's still no overall plan for spending available monies that were not in the May budget. May 27 budget made massive and damaging cuts to the staff's budget requests because of extremely poor revenue projections. Of course, the first thing we remember is the about $17 million in well-deserved pay increases for bus drivers, instructional staff, security officers, custodians, administrators. Our people still need these increases. It's harder to remember other, perhaps more damaging cuts. Curriculum and instruction requested almost $1 million increase, but suffered a reduction about $1.4 million. Student supports requested a $500,000 increase, but suffered about a $200,000 reduction. Mr. Myers identified the needs for nurses, teachers, assistants for special education at a cost of about $1.4 million. None of those needs were met. The staff said they needed about $1.5 million for social workers and counselors and some other support staff to meet the needs of students. Those needs weren't met either. The important thing about these particular items is they were aimed directly at meeting our children's needs. Together they come to about $5 million by my account. $5 million is a lot of money, but Mr. McPherson reported in September that KCS had almost $10 million available in the fund balance above and beyond the state-mandated, state-required $15 million. And tax revenue continues to come in above last year's revenues, far more than projections the budget is based on. We have the money. The question is, how will we spend it? Let's look at what's happening in the schools. Mr. Reiswick reports that students' absentees are the highest ever. He reports that more students than ever, Mr. Thomas made reference to that, are failing classes. These are powerful indicators that our students, many of our students, are in crisis. Almost certainly our students' needs for counselors, social workers even greater than the staff anticipated in February. Teachers are also in crisis. They are overloaded, overwhelmed. Many of them are close to the breaking point. They need help. I don't have any doubt that we need this new administrator, and I believe the central office is understaffed. That's all clear enough. What's not clear is how an additional administrator or other additional administrators are going to help the students and school staff who are in crisis right now. I hope we can afford both, but I think you will agree that the needs of our children and our staff in the schools must be the highest priority. I urge you to tell the superintendent to postpone this staffing request, and he has a plan to meet the needs of our students, their teachers, and the other staff in our schools. If there's still money after those needs are met, no doubt diversity and advancement position should be the first priority. Thank you.
Ms. Tanya Coates, please state your name and county of residence.
Tanya Coates, Knox County, President of Knox County Education Association. I want to thank you all, Madam Chair and the board. I want to particularly talk to you about two line items under your regular agenda. One is about the resolution. I know that you didn't have any concerns, but one I want to tell you and talk to you in regards as you consider next week when you get ready to approve this resolution, why it's so considerably important that it's coming from the board and it was recommended by the superintendent, which I can't say enough that he's done everything to support the educators of Knox County. But when you think about this resolution and this your beliefs, educators across Knox County really honestly now know that you support them by any means. Majority of you up here have actually went through a plan or you have actually started a new job. Well, this is what most educators feel like this year, that they are doing double the amount of work, sometimes triple the amount of work. It's just that our hands are tied as educators in the classroom when it comes to this, making sure that students' their test scores are added to our evaluation. This year, this is unprecedented. We shouldn't even be evaluating educators this year. We shouldn't even be testing kids this year. And I know you're probably sitting there telling yourselves, I know this, but I think through your legislative plan, you need to make some concerted efforts, or at least consider some concerted efforts of really, truly understanding what educators are going through in their classroom. If you have to think about teachers are learning this year on a hybrid level, a new technology piece that we just got back at the end of July that all of the educators in Knox County just got. And we had to learn Canvas, we knew Aspen, but they don't even talk to each other. So it's challenging, and I think it's unfortunate that our State Department of Ed has no idea what educators are going through in their classrooms to try to make sure that students are learning. So we appreciate the resolution, but I think more concerted efforts, not only in your districts, but across the state, we need to join together to show that educators don't need this pressure of being evaluated for one, and students being tested and wasting valuable time and money where we need to be uplifting and mentally supporting them. The other one that, as you consider, the collaborative conferencing management team. We are overwhelmed with gratitude to know that you have the confidence to actually name a management team before a vote is even completed. This is showing that our collaboration with your educators in Knox County and with the board working together to make sure that, one, we're addressing the 7 things that the state has mandated before us. That is, that you are always wanting to make sure that you're improving the salaries of employees, that you're making sure that we have a viable grievance process, our insurance that you just agreed to actually pay for us last month, fringe benefits, working conditions, leave, and payroll deductions. Without your consideration and having a management team already assigned before December 1, it would have been evident that you did not support educators in Knox County. But you have two valuable things that are on this, would you consider next week, that are the most valued thing that you could do for your educators in Knox County, is agree to assign a management team and write this resolution. And we can't say thank you enough. Thank you.
That concludes public forum. I'd like to thank our public forum speakers tonight for coming before us.
Thank you, Ms. Babb. And do we have anyone who would like to comment during board forum? Ms. Satterfield?
Yes, I just kind of wanted to say that this agenda that we have this meeting gave me a little bit of encouragement that we're getting back on track. So with the Grow Your Own program and adding the position, just kind of thinking about us getting back on track to moving Knox County schools forward. And it also gives me, I know we're still in the middle of a pandemic, but it feels that like that feels a little bit more under control and manageable to where we're now focusing on moving the district forward. So thank you for putting that stuff back onto the agenda. And then also I just want to express gratitude to the Lonsdale community for advocating for what they need, and also just my fellow board members for being as concerned as I am with this process. So thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Owen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Coates, collaborative conferencing has come a long, long way since we first started. And it's greatly appreciated, all the work that went into that. I'd like to remind people that the Teacher Supply Depot opening is this Friday and Saturday. It will be a little bit different this year to ensure plenty of room for distancing and other safety measures. So teachers, please be sure to look at your email from Carly or check the Teacher Supply Depot's Facebook page for a link to sign up for a shopping time. I believe the ones on Friday are filled, but there are shopping times available on Saturday. So be sure and look at the Facebook page or email from Carly to get the link to sign up for Teacher Supply Depot. And also big thanks to all the folks who've been putting that together. There have been tons of donations coming in, and the staff has been working very, very hard, and volunteers working really hard to get that set up and ready. Thank you.
Okay, anything else? Okay, I think I'm going to propose next week that we just add a conversation to discuss the quarantine, the amount of time our healthy students are being quarantined. I know you've probably heard from community members, as I have. I think if there's data that we have that could be shared with board members about the number of students who've been quarantined who actually become sick, that could be helpful. So if we have that to send out to board members, when you look at the amount of failing grades that we know that our virtual students have, and then you think about students who move from in-school to virtual and the disruption that is, and how detrimental that is to students, student grades and learning. I think as we learn more with COVID-19, I think we need to make sure that we're adjusting to that. And obviously it would be nice, I know, anyway, we can talk about it next week, but if everybody would just go ahead and kind of gather your thoughts, and we can discuss that next week. Mr. McMillan?
Since you brought it up and we're going to talk about it, I would like for you to think about consistency as far as, and what I'm talking about is, you remember at the retreat, the health department doctor told us that if somebody tested positive, no matter how many people were in the room, they should all be quarantined, I think, until they could run that down.
I don't think it's everybody in the classroom. If a student in a classroom are quarantined, then the whole classroom would be quarantined? That's
what she said until, am I wrong?
I think, well, no, I don't think that's the case. I've had that conversation several times with
Well,
Jason
how do you
Myers.
decide? How do you decide?
Well, it's up to I think the staff members. So, Dr. Reiswick, would you like to address that real quick? Because I think that this is kind of important, that this is not on the agenda, but this will just provide us some clarification as we move forward for next week's conversation.
Thank you, Ms. Horn, and Mr. Myers couldn't be here tonight, but he knows this far better than I do. But basically, the contact tracing, our nurses were trained by the health department. I always say they're kind of deputized by them, so they follow those, and if there's any kinds of questions or unusual things from the training that they received in a situation they encounter, they always go back to the epidemiologist at the health department to get, clarity or that sort of thing. So it's basically the CDC guidelines of the 6 feet or 15 minutes of exposure. So we have lots of, I'm gonna say lots, let me say it another way. We actually have not as many as we expected to have classrooms where sometimes that's happening around quarantine. And so lots of times it's the tracing process of the interview of the person who tests positive, as well as, we've had everything from, talking to the teachers in the room and or other adults, interviewing students, and even at times looking at kind of videotaping that sort of thing from, if they were on a bus or something like that. So all of that goes into each one of the traces, and again, they were trained by the health department to do that.
Well, I don't want to belabor the point, but the parent did tell me that one kid tested, now this was in high school, tested positive in the class. I don't know exactly, but how many kids were in there? Probably 20 or more at least. And that his daughter was sent home, and for 2 weeks now. And some of the other kids were not. They were all in the same classroom. And they made her do the full 2 weeks, and she told her dad, and I think she probably told the truth, because I think, they're truthful people, that the person that tested positive, she said, I have never been within 30 feet of the guy in my entire life. So why would they send her home?
Yeah,
Now,
that's a good
that
question.
may be an isolated situation, but if they're splitting a class, sending some,
Right.
But
and I'll just say this again. I mean, and there are details in every situation, that are part of that. But sometimes it's the 24-hour exposure of over 15 minutes. So in some cases, you could have a student who might have been in 2 classes with, a student and maybe had that extended exposure, as opposed to one class. So again, I don't know without knowing the details of that situation.
So, just for my purposes, what I said there is wrong. They're operating now with the 15-minute rule.
6 feet.
And 6 feet. And that changed also, that the 15-minute thing changed about 2 weeks ago. So
Well,
it's cumulative and not consecutive 15 minutes. So that's a big difference also.
Well, but when we had the retreat, she did tell us that, though, originally, didn't she? That they would send everybody home until they could investigate it.
I don't know for sure. I'm not 100% sure.
That doesn't matter now.
But anyway.
Anyway, I didn't want to belabor it.
That's okay. So we'll just, if you would gather your thoughts on that, and we'll come back to that next week. And if there's no other board forum, then we are adjourned. Thank you.